Thanks everyone for coming to this talk. My name is Oleg Nenashev and I represent WireMock. But today I'm actually going to talk about changelog automation and release drafter. So quick question, who's familiar with this tool? Okay, that's why you come to Tools in Action. And I need to check another thing. Are you sure you're at the right talk? Because right now in parallel there is a presentation on WireMock, and it was supposed to be on Monday, but due to some changes of scheduling, it's now. So if you want to hear about WireMock, you don't hear to the guy in this t-shirt, you go to another room. But I will be also talking about WireMock, but just on Thursday, we will be talking about WireMock and test containers together with Oleg from Atomic Jar. So I will be presenting once again. Okay, just to quickly introduce myself. So yeah, I started working in tech more than 15 years ago. I started in hardware and embedded, and then I switched to electronic design automation, and then to classic automation. So I started doing a lot of Jenkins, and then a lot of developer tooling with Maven, with many other tools, including WireMock. So first time I tried it was 8 years ago. Now I also participate in multiple foundations, including CDF. I'm Cloud CNCF ambassador. I also work in some hardware foundations. And just 2 weeks ago, I created test containers for C, C++, just to refresh my embedded skills. So if it's something interesting to you, or if you just like test containers for Java, test containers for Golang, or for any other languages, come to the Atomic Jar booth. I will be actually there, and I will be happy to discuss WireMock, test containers, Jenkins if you want, and anything else. Okay, let's start with the main presentation. Who does write changelogs for your projects? Who doesn't like writing changelogs? Yeah, that's actually quite a good percentage, because historically, not that many developers used to do that, but with shift left, with DevOps, etc., when teams became more integrated, there are more and more developers responsible to actually write the changelogs, especially when we talk about modern approaches like progressive delivery, like just continuous delivery, when everything goes from the repository. But in enterprises, it's still quite different. And I have a story from one of my previous clients. I won't mention it. But yeah, this was a client which was shipping a big app. This app was really big, something like 10 gigabytes, and it was 2010. So long before it became common on Steam, at least. And this application had no changelogs at all, and many users were coming to this company and asking, so where can we get changelogs, how we can actually discover what's wrong with our projects. It keeps breaking, but we cannot even see where to look. It was closed source, there was nothing. And actually, developers had exactly the same problem, because it was a huge component with many teams working on it, with many teams doing integration into a single product. But teams didn't know what other teams are doing. There were no changelogs, there were no public issue tracker, and actually it was not fun at all. And there was a guy. At this point, it was actually not a community manager. It was a product manager, but he had a really good idea how to fix it. How do you think it could be done? Of course, let's make developers write it. So this is how it was solved in this company. So there was a style guide, supplied as PDF, something like 5 pages describing how to write the changelogs, and obviously nothing changed. But what changed? This guy actually became responsible for that later. So everyone was expecting him to write the changelogs for whole product, and it was actually quite an effort. He was keeping doing that for some time, and then he left the company. So then there was no changelogs, back to square one. Obviously, for such a person, there could be another decision. For example, instead of just taking care of all the changelogs on their own, they could have invested some time and just automated these changelogs. There are many tools available for that. Who does use conventional commits or JReleaser? It's two quite popular tools for Java ecosystem. Also, there are some similar tools for Golang, so conventional commits is more for Golang. But there are other tools that are quite universal, and they can apply it to your projects. One of the tools is Release Drafter, and yeah, this is a tool I really like. I used it for quite a lot, and I want to briefly show it to you today. So what you will see a tool that allows to automate change logs by using your pull request and metadata in this pull request like label. It doesn't use commits, so it means that the developers are not responsible to provide clear commit messages, which has been quite a story in many companies. And also, Release Drafter is fully integrated with GitHub. There are ports to GitLab and for other tools, so you can probably use it quite well in your projects. I started with this tool in Jenkins, and in Jenkins, yeah, if you have ever seen this changelog, you probably can see where it's going. In Jenkins, there were actually many different types of changelogs. We had Wiki on Confluence, we have Jenkins.io, we started adopting GitHub releases, we had changelogs written elsewhere, so there were vendor companies putting changelogs on their site. And some plugins had no changelogs at all. It was a mess for users. So this is where I got introduced to Release Drafter first time. It wasn't this big company I was working on with. And in Jenkins, we decided that, yeah, we will try something new. So in addition to all these methods, we actually took another tool. And yes, this tool was a Release Drafter. I will just show a few slides, and then I actually want to show it live to you if you're interested. So Release Drive is a tool which was created around 2015, I believe. It initially started as a GitHub app, but now it's available only as a GitHub Action. It's actually co-maintained by Joseph Peterson and a few other people from the Jenkins community. So Jenkins is one of the biggest users of Release Drafter in terms of open source ecosystems. And the tool itself, yeah, it's used by hundreds of projects, open source or not. Yeah, as I said, it actually uses pull requests and labels as data. It uses other technologies under the hood, like Probot, to manage configurations. And the key advantage for it is that it's very flexible. So depending on regardless of what version strategy you have, regardless of what a process in your team, whether you do progressive delivery, whether you do continuous delivery from main branch for each merge, or whether you release every month, Release Drafter is something you can adapt to. And yeah, it doesn't depend on conventional commits and any other standard, so it doesn't force your developers to follow particular commit strategy. And it doesn't force you to force push or amend Git commits every time this strategy is violated, pretty much every day, right? So that's the approach. And yeah, the process on slides is quite simple. So it's example of WireMock. We use Release Drafter there too. And yeah, you have a bunch of pull requests. Some pull requests can be coming from a tool like Dependabot. Some can be coming from users. And these pull requests are annotated with labels. So some are determined as bugs, some like enhancements, etc. And we have a number of merged pull requests. So what Release Drafter does, basically, it accesses GitHub over API, pulls this data, and then converts this data to automated changelog like that. So it's markdown file, Gitmoji, so emoji are quite common in GitHub changelogs these days. There is even a standard for that, which is followed by default by Release Drafter. And yes, from your standpoint as a developer or as a user, it just takes your history and generates the changelog. And you can define how it gets generated using a GitHub Action. So it's quite handy. It again references pull requests, it references issues, it can embed additional context if you want, and everything is automated. So the flow is pretty simple. You just merge the things, and then when you do the release, you actually need to copy edit this changelog, because we use pull request titles or pull request message text bodies to generate these changelogs. And most likely, when you actually ship the latest version, you will need to edit the file, but it's just markdown, which is prepared, which is ready to go. So you put some syntax. For example, here I highlighted some code clauses by just adding some slashes. And also, yeah, you can see that there is basically quite a handy changelog. And then you can also see the files, because I was generating as a part of my pipeline. And this is a real release, so if you want to check, it's on GitHub. And yeah, it's one of my pet projects, which again uses release drafter for changelog automation. So this is basically the functionality, and you can see that there are other examples. So for example, test containers uses release drafter as well. It's slightly different format, because you can see that there is actually some conventional commits here, but the principle is the same. How it works in principle? Who's familiar with GitHub Actions? Okay, so GitHub Actions is an engine for all kinds of automation. And if you just go to any repository, so let's start from WireMock today. Actually, WireMock is not a great example because of one feature I will show you later. But we can take test containers for C++. So this is kind of a boring project. It just has one release, so it's not very informative here. But if you go to .GitHub, here you have definitions. Yeah, it's big enough. And you need just 2 items. So one item, you need a definition for your GitHub Actions workflow that would be actually generating your changelog. So it's here, and you can see that we generate changelogs every time something is pushed to main branch. So for example, when you merge a commit, when somebody does a direct push. And you can also trigger it manually, just because sometimes it's interesting. When you copy it, pull requests, titles, add labels, you can regenerate the changelog so to see what is coming. And after that, there is just a few steps, but you can see that it uses release drafter version 5. So it's a repository coming as a GitHub action. This repository is available on GitHub too. So this is basically a release drafter itself. I won't be showing you code because it's written in JavaScript mostly, but it's actually portable to other languages because it's distributed as a Docker container. And yeah, there is a lot of syntax. I'm not going to describe them, but I'm going to show you a few. So how I normally do release drafter. Let's go to my project. There is another file which actually defines the configuration. Release drafter comes with some defaults that generate a very basic changelog, but you can actually improve it. So in my case, what I'm doing, I'm defining name template and tag template. I'm following GitHub recommendations on the tagging. So you can see v something and the next patch version. So release drafter is able to scan your repository, to scan history of your releases, determine the formats of versions, and actually make some assumptions of versions. And this is used just for some visualization for name draft. And after that, I do some categorization. And for categorization, I, for example, set breaking changes, new features and improvements, bug fixes, etc., etc. So here you can see that there are labels. You can set up multiple labels or just one. And what you need when you generate this changelog is that somebody actually sets these labels correctly. So when you review the changes, when you measure these changes, you can use these labels, or you can actually ask release drafter to automatically label the pull requests, because now there is some capability that actually resolves this issue. And what else I have in this demo? I also have some labels I exclude, because sometimes there are pull requests you do not want to be included, like reversing things which do not even go to the release. And then I can define a template. In this case, I use the default template of release drafter. And I also can do some labeling. So basically, because I don't like to set labels for the pull requests, sometimes it's not needed. But sometimes it's useful. And for example, here I say that if there is markdown update, I put label documentation. If somebody follows the common branching approach, I can also determine enhancement and bug labels, which again helps a bit. There are other actions like GitHub auto labeler action and many other bits. So you can implement the same with other actions. And after that, once this file is integrated, the approach is pretty much simple. So let's take WireMock itself, I guess, because if I recall correctly, there are some pull requests I'm able to merge. So this is WireMock core. It's a big Java project I'm actually going to present on Thursday. And you can see that there is a number of releases that have been already generated by Release Drafter. And there is new upcoming release, which has only one change at the moment, allowing empty URI pass for segments. So you can, if you go to this pull request, it's merged, it's automated. And we can just merge another one to see what happens in this repository. There is, for example, dependency update. We use Dependabot for automation in this repository, and I can just merge this commit because all the CI has already passed. And let's see what happens. So we go to GitHub Actions. There is a Release Drafter action, and yeah, there is a run. So let's see what this run does. You can see that it actually pulls some metadata and updates the release. Right now, everything went well. There are not so many pull requests. There are not so many things to update, so it just passed. And let's go to the release draft. What happens there? And you can see that the release draft actually has 2 items now. So along empty URIs, before that it was other changes because the pull request hasn't been copy edited. So we just merged it, and then somebody, well, me, updated the labels. And the second pull request is dependency update. So we determined it, we have this changelog, and it's ready. There is one thing that you need to keep in mind, that GitHub doesn't allow draft releases to be public. So only maintainers of this repository, so somebody with write permissions or above, will be able to see this changelog. So if you want to provide heads up to your users for projects that are not released often, you can use other automation to publish the upcoming release. Just extract this markdown. It's available as GitHub variable, and you can push it, for example, for README to changelog MD, and it's quite handy. So that's a really simple thing. But as I said, there are a lot more changes available in a lot more features available in Release Drafter. One of the things I use heavily in all my projects is external configuration, because instead of doing configuration every time, I actually want the configurations to be managed on the organization level. So all maintainers of different components would be able to collaborate. They do not need to set up all the automation, all the GitHub Actions, etc. So in this repository, instead of doing configuration in a single repo, I just import it from .github. So this is a functionality provided by Probot. Sorry, I'm mostly zooming from my own screen today, but yeah. Here, if you go to .github, we have another definition, and there is a release drafter file which is shared between the projects. So all our projects within the same organization use this changelog, and if something is needed, they can actually override some bits of this changelog, amend it, so that there is more customization. There are more other useful features which we do not use in WireMock, but for example, which we use in Jenkins. So Jenkins has more than 2,500 repositories in 2 GitHub organizations, and most of them by now are managed by the release drafter. So here, yeah, I haven't been on this page for quite a while. Yeah, here, if you go to .github, again, it's the same approach. But we have some additional features available in this repository. So yeah, the release drafter YAML. And in this release drafter, you can also see a few other useful sections, actually just one. It's replacers. Because sometimes, for example, when you use Jira, when you use other metadata, you just put issue IDs in pull request titles, and then you need to do something fancy for your users. And you can just use regular expressions to actually overwrite some bits. So it's basically regex applied against Markdown. And by that, we can inject, for example, here we do some issues injection. So we just say how it needs to be released. So for example, for Jenkins, which still uses Jira for the Jenkins core, we point to Jira. And for security issues, we point to security advisory. And for CVs, for example, we also point to CV repository. And there are a few other examples which are just shorten common acronyms we use in the projects. So this is a global configuration. And this global configuration, again, is used across the board. But we can just go, for example, to Jenkins. Well, it's Jenkins core itself. And here you can see that, yeah, this is a release being generated, again, by release drafter. So you can see that here we actually have some additional bits. But yeah, we also have all these issues being resolved. Also, we have Jenkins enhancements proposals being resolved. And again, this is changelog, which is almost fully generated by now. And this which is propagated to our site. So we do not spend much time copy editing it manually, submitting pull requests in YAML like we used to do, let's say 5 years ago. And the .github in this project is also quite simple. So release drafter YAML. And here you can see that we actually do just one thing. We replace the template to add a disclaimer. We use it to indicate that it's not a final changelog. Final changelog will be published on our website. But this changelog is fully automated. Every time we have a Jenkins release, it's still called weekly release, but actually we can release every day as we wish. And here this release just adds this disclaimer. And we also use another versioning policy. So here we have a right version template, name template in a YAML file. But most of the config, again, comes from the global configuration. So yeah, this is actually how it works. I still have quite a lot of things, but I guess I presented most of them. So I will just show a few examples and that we will have time for questions. So yeah, these are all changelogs generated by release drafter. All sources are open source, so you can copy them and reuse them. Actually, even this image is being generated by code because there is a tool that takes Markdown, generates image from that. So I take changelog and inject everything in a fancy way. Same, for example, for Jenkins file runner, it's another project. It's also fully generated. I have a pet project for Java Fast engine, and this is also a changelog generated by release drafter. So depending on your needs, depending on complexity of your project, you can define different policies. Here they are all similar because I was involved in all projects. I basically use release drafter standards more or less, but you can create your own changelog. And actually, changelogs do not even have to be Markdown because there are some additional capabilities that are available. So you can add hooks, you can add scripting to the generation, you can also do processing in another GitHub action. And yeah, just a second tell. I was about hiding this slide, but yeah. Actually, even for YAML generation, apparently you can do YAML generation like that. So we, for example, updated the release drafter to support templating for YAMLs. It's a bit weird, but it works. So we were able to generate YAML changelogs so that we consume in Jenkins, for example, for automation. And again, it's done by release drafter. So I think that's all about the use cases. So our success story in Jenkins, it's adopted in more than 500 repositories by now. More than 6 contributors from Jenkins joined the release drafter and improved its functionality. For example, performance, because before the team started contributing to it, it was taking something like 5 minutes to generate the changelog, and now it takes just a few seconds. And yeah, we switched almost all our developer tooling, almost everything that we do for continuous delivery to release drafter. So we generate changelogs on every commit, along with release on every commit. In Jenkins, yeah, so basically what we have left is GitHub releases that are integrated with Jenkins.io. We still have changelog MD, which in many projects are also integrated with release drafter, so by just follow up GitHub Action. And we have GitHub releases, and that's it. This is actually a good progress from maintenance side, and yeah, if you have big curly project with a lot of dependencies, with a lot of models being released. By adopting such approach, you can save a lot of time on automation and on testing. So my recommendation to you, yeah, just use changelog automation. There are many tools available for that. So like JReleaser, I mentioned, it was actually presented yesterday. Also, yeah, there are tools like gitcleave. There is just conventional commit engine. And yeah, if you need something flexible, something that is dependent on pull requests and labels, you can use Release Drafter because it's the tool that is actually designed for collaboration tools like GitHub. So it becomes much more handy for these use cases. And all the links are available. So it's open source, it's open for contributions, and we would actually appreciate contributions there because, again, it's a project that is driven by volunteers. There are some example configurations that are shown. You can see them here, and I will be sharing slides on my Twitter account right after the presentation, so you can see the links here. And thanks a lot for your time. We have 5 minutes for any questions you might have. Okay, any questions? Yes? Yeah, so in this regards, it's portable and not portable. Because if you remember the original state of Dependabot, there was Dependabot as open source project, which was able to run against multiple systems. But at the same time, it was running as a service just for GitHub. And pretty much the same situation right now is with Release Drafter. There is a tool in this repository which is portable, which there are prototypes for GitLab. I'm not sure about Azure DevOps, but as long as you can extract the data, you can use it. The problem is that you rely on special APIs, so you need to convert these APIs, but I think it could be totally done. So if somebody from using Azure DevOps wants to use this tool, they go to this repository and I guess write a short adapter to pull the data from there. So, but the tool itself, yeah, it's right, I think. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So today I got away with doing a tools and action talk without even opening my IDE, and yeah. Any additional questions about the tool before we close down? Yes?
How can choose the proper format for message which are published release? You mentioned that I can use both, for example, Jira and GitHub pull request, and developer can write any kind of things in pull request.
Yeah, so the question is how to choose the the proper messaging format. So there is one good approach: follow your contributing guidelines if they are there. If they're not, there are actually a number of existing standards. So what I was referring to today is conventional commits. So it's the website that actually says how to actually write your commit messages so that they would be unified and they would be understood by developers. And basically, the approach is like that: type, optional scope, description. So for example, type can be fix or feature with additional specification if you contribute to submodel, and then the description. And this approach can be used. Many companies actually use conventional commits and other bits, but as I mentioned during the talk, the problem is keeping all contributors to a project following this specification for commits. That's technically not possible in open source unless you create a lot of issues for contributor experience. Because every time you request change in your open source project saying that your commit messages are wrong, please edit these commit messages and force push, half of the contributors will be gone because they don't know how to do force push, they do not want to, and ultimately it's not their job. But with reliance on pull requests, you can actually do it on your own because you as a maintainer can copy edit the description of any pull request and then you can make some adjustments. So I'm not a maintainer of this project. Just a second. Let's just open WireMock itself. So for example, when I merge things, you can see that here incoming pull requests, yeah, they're not formatted, etc. I can just take, for example, this pull request and to allow to just align with our pull request and message recommendations, I just need to fix one later. But if I was following conventional commits, etc., I could have done it the same here. I can edit the body, and this body actually also works as a kind of self-documentation because it's a pull request template, so you can request particular bits like description, checklist, screenshots, whatever, and whomever accesses the changelog, they will see it right away. So it's quite a good automation tool if you define your open source contribution flows. Okay. Yeah, time's up. Thanks a lot.